Hello, I'm Gator McKlusky. Welcome to my new series focused on classic film commentaries. Over 20 years ago, when DVDs first started coming out, one of the great features for film fanatics like myself were the alternate audio tracks dedicated to commentaries. They kind of brought me into the making of the film. Sometimes directors, actors, even screenwriters can really add enormous insight to the movies we love. So with the success of streaming films on services like Netflix and Amazon Prime, the lost art of commentaries have not yet found a platform outside of old school discs that have really gone the way of the 8-track tape, the record album, and the CD. DVDs and Blu-rays are now for purists, but most of you out there just stick to streaming media. So here will be my platform for sharing some of my favorite film commentaries. Now keep in mind, these videos will be designed for audio and there's not much to see as I can't show you the actual film in its entirety. But I'll try to present a professional looking backdrop with quality still images from the film to help keep the story going. Ideally, you would listen while doing other things and maybe perhaps resting on the couch, imagining the film and things described by our talented commentators. Or perhaps you can line up your version of the film and play it along with this video to further enhance your experience. Anyway, I hope this series is enjoyable for you. So sit back and enjoy our next feature presentation. In 1972, the critically acclaimed film Deliverance was released, forcing Hollywood to take notice that Burt Reynolds was a star in the making. Directed by the great John Boorman and based on the best-selling novel by James Dickey, Deliverance tells the story of 4 friends who take a canoeing trip they'll never forget. Starring Jon Voight, Ned Beatty, Ronny Cox, along with Burt Reynolds, this in-depth commentary by director John Boorman is a fascinating deep dive into the making of the film. So let's sit back and enjoy this commentary from the 1972 classic, Deliverance.
I'm John Boorman. I directed and produced Deliverance. It's a story about a river that is going to be dammed and killed, really. And these 4 men are going up there before it disappears to canoe it. Well, originally, the studio said, look, we'll do this picture if you can find 2 stars. So I went out and I found 2 stars. And then the studio said, well, it's going to cost too much with these 2 stars. So you better go and make it really cheaply with unknown actors. So I went all over America looking for actors in theaters and I found 2, Ned Beatty and Ronny Cox. Neither of them had ever made a film or done a television or anything. But I couldn't really find unknowns to fill the 2 main roles. And so I got onto Voight. And Voight resisted the picture. He had just made a film called The All-American Boy, and it was a mess, and he was trying to salvage it, and he was thinking about giving up acting. And I persuaded him to eventually to do the role, and he says that I saved his life, and then spent 3 months trying to kill him. And then I went to Burt, and Burt at that time had done, fortunately, I didn't know, coming from the outside, that Burt had done 3 TV series that were unsuccessful. I didn't know anything about that, so I put him in the picture. And still, the studio wanted to make it cheaper. And I had to cut more money. I pared it right down. And you'll see in this first sequence of the film, there's the 2 cars with the canoes come up into a little filling station. And there they encounter this boy who seems to be retarded, and he plays the banjo. He plays the banjo, and Ronnie Cox as Drew with his guitar. They play this dueling banjos, which is a traditional piece, and that was always written into the script. But they demanded that I cut still more out of the budget. So I had an orchestra and composer in the budget, and I intended anyway to use dueling banjos as the theme running through the film, and so I decided to dump the composer and the orchestra and use dueling banjos as the entire score. I spent 2 hours in a recording studio with a banjo picker and a guitarist, and we recorded the whole thing. And when it came out and the picture opened, I tried to persuade Warner Records to bring the record out, and the head of Warner Records gave me this lecture. He said, "Now let me tell you something about the music business. That he said, this is not rock and roll. If radio stations don't play it, it won't be successful." Now he said, it's not rock and roll clearly, and it's not middle of the road, and it's not country music, because country music is all about the words, so no one's going to play it. Well, I persuaded them to bring it out in a small area, test area, and it turned out that every radio station played it, and it became the #1 record, and it's become famous. Of course, it's when anybody find themselves in a dark wood or a savage river, they hum that tune. Now, this, interesting enough, up this Clayton, Georgia, where we were shooting this, on this river, these people up there, some of them you see in the film, including the boys playing the banjo, but the old man who dances here, and many others are all hillbillies. And the fascinating thing, of course, with the kind of inbreeding that is so notorious in these communities, is that is the reason I discovered up there is that these were the descendants of white people who married Indians, and they were then ostracized by both the Indians and the whites, and so they had to turn in on themselves. And this strange, hostile, inward-looking community grew up around that history. And you can see in some of these people's faces, you can see traces of the Indian. Burt is an extraordinary character in this film, and the film suited his characteristics, which I would say, a kind of there's a kind of vanity there, but at the same time, Burt's redeeming quality is that he makes fun of himself, and it was a part absolutely made for him. We searched around to find a kid who could do this in the local community, and we found this boy who actually was quite bright, really, but because of the way he looked, he was treated as retarded by the community, and so unfortunately he couldn't play the banjo. So what I did was I found another kid who could play the banjo. If you look at that now, you see that hand is not his, the one that's fretting. It's another kid who's crouched behind him. You see that his left hand is another kid, and we just made an extra sleeve into the on the shirt there, and he's doing the strumming, but this other little boy who's never got credited because we were not anxious to reveal this fact, but I can reveal it to you now. I hope you're not disillusioned. Ned, it's interesting. Ned had never been in a film before, and he just absolutely knew this character, and he never put a foot wrong. we did a lot of rehearsal, a lot of training, because they had to train to canoe and the archery and so forth. But during that period of rehearsal, James Dickey, who wrote the novel on which the film is based, a wonderful poet, and an intimidating man, I invited him to come up for the rehearsals, and in Clayton, Georgia, and he drank a lot, and he really spooked the actors because he insisted on calling them by the characters that they're playing. And when I first went to meet Dickey, he told me that he took me on one side and said, "I'm going to tell you something I've never told a living soul. Everything in that book happened to me." Well, I was so shocked, I had my production manager with me, and he, as we left the house, I said, and since I'd been told, I had sworn not to tell a living soul. Of course, I couldn't wait to tell someone, and I told my production manager, and he said, yes, he said, he told me the same thing. And when we were up there, he took each of these actors aside and told them the same story, that everything in this book happened to me. Now, when I got into a canoe with James Dickey and he capsized it, I realized that absolutely nothing in this book had happened to him. And I'm much more impressed by a man who could invent this story than I am of someone who lived it. You look at this character now, this woman, look, the way they lived there, that was just absolutely how it was. That was not set up in any way. It was just us peering through a window with the camera. The rehearsals went on, and eventually the actors came to me and said, look, you've got to ask Jim Dickey to go, because it's they just couldn't function. And he so Burt particularly was upset by it. So I said to Jim, look, Jim, I'd already cast him to play the sheriff later in this film, and I said to Jim, look, Jim, you have to. I want you to go, and I want you to come back and play the sheriff. I said, but you've just got to let us get on with making the film. And he raised up and he glared at me. I thought he was going to hit me, but he said, all right, but before I go, I want to see the boys. So I took him down to the rehearsal room, and he came in and he stood there and he glared at them and he said, it appears that my presence will be most efficacious by its absence. And he turned on his heel and he left. And Burt said, does that mean he's going or he's staying? And eventually he left, and he was angry, and he said to me, I ain't coming back. Get yourself another boy. But he came back and he played the sheriff and worked out. But when the film opened in Atlanta, premiere, Burt was standing next to Dickey, and a radio reporter came with a microphone and said, Mr. Reynolds, I understand that you had problems with Mr. Dickey, and Burt said, well, yes, I did say that, but I also believe that Mr. Dickey is one of America's greatest poets. What do you say to that, Mr. Dickey? Jim Dickey said, well, I don't know how many of America's great poets Mr. Reynolds has read. This kind of truck, you might think it looks a bit odd, but let me tell you, there were plenty of those trucks in even worse repair down there. And this scene, in which they go down to the river, there's already a menace in the air. The Voight character is nervous, and of course there's a kind of recklessness about the character of played by Burt Reynolds, Lewis. And you see, these four characters in a sense, were four aspects of James Dickey's personality. Ed is the careful advertising executive, which is what James Dickey was, and Burt is the macho man concerned with the idea of survival, and he liked to think of himself as this kind of outdoors man who could survive when the everything else collapsed. And then you had Drew, and James Dickey played the guitar, and that was sort of the sensitive artistic side of Dickey. And then Ned Beatty, who was aggressive and cowardly, which Jim also was. And he was somebody called me who was writing his official biography after he died, and I was telling him how Dickey had this air of the tough frontiersman, and I said, he didn't have anything to prove. After all, he was a fighter pilot in the Korean War. And the biographer said, that was also a lie. And I prefer to call it invention, imagination. This scene, when they finally see this river, is very powerful. And because you see, behind it is this notion, the idea that the river is going to disappear. It's going to be flooded. And the beauty of it is it's going to be lost. And there's something... it's a metaphor, really, a dam, which is going to produce electricity for the air conditioners in Atlanta. And to do so, the river is killed. And, I searched for a river to shoot this picture on. I wanted it to be as wild and savage as possible. And wherever I looked, and I took photos and looked at them, is that the film stocks that we use makes everything look pretty. And I found this river, which it has these jagged rocks and canyons and rapids, and it's one of the most dangerous rivers in America for canoeing. It still looked pretty. So what I did was all the scenes on the river were desaturated, so that you took some of that color away. You can see now how the green is now muted, and I wanted to dispense with that prettiness. So we had two canoes there. One was aluminum, and the other was a traditional Indian canoe with ribbed wood. Now the wooden one got smashed up. We destroyed 5 of them in the course of making the film, and the aluminum one was severely dented by the rocks, and this wooden one was so vulnerable to this kind of rapid shooting. I mean, this river is really only canoed by kayaks, and all these rivers in America, they're graded for their degrees of difficulty, and this is about as difficult as you can get. And now the question was how, as Voight said, he thought I was trying to kill him. How do you get actors to do this kind of thing? And my method is simply to talk about it very simply, and as though in a totally matter-of-fact way. I'd say, okay, guys, now we just this piece of I just want you to go down this piece of Savage River here and shoot these rapids. And there were some awful moments where they actually turned their backs on me when I asked them to get in the canoes, and the drawn white faces. You see, this is interesting. You see how low the camera is. Vilmos Sigmund and I shot most of these river scenes, Sigmund being the cameraman. We shot them. We were in a little rubber boat, just he and I, and a grip, the 3 of us. All the river scenes were probably shot by us 3. We left the crew behind, and we'd take our lunch in a plastic bag, and we'd go down and shoot the rapids, and then the crew would pick us up at a lower point, which was prearranged. I mean, I canoed the whole river myself in rehearsals, and so this was the other way that I managed to persuade them to do this, is that I was able to claim that I'd canoed it all myself, and because I've loved rivers all my life and boats. And here you see the boy again. This is a very touching scene. There's some kind of menace in it, as though this boy has some secret knowledge of what's going to happen to these men. And he's like a savant. And this turning shot, which is extremely difficult to shoot, gives it a strange kind of dynamic. After the film came out, a lot of people wanted to canoe this river, and several were drowned. And I was asked how I felt about that. Did I feel responsible for it? And I was able to reply by saying that, I made the river look as dangerous and life-threatening as possible, so that anybody who canoed it must have known what to expect. And it is, canoeing is incredibly exhilarating. To go down rapids, it's one of the most fundamental things. Flowing water, moving water. It's like a metaphor for life itself. And they express their exhilaration here. Ned and Burt did very well in the canoeing, and they had the better canoe, of course. And John and Drew and Ronnie were made a lot more mistakes. And the worst thing that happened really was that Ned, they had a wipeout, and Ned was in the water, and he disappeared, and he didn't come out for just over a minute. I had a diver with me always, and he went in to try and find him, and we just searched, and it was dreadful. And eventually he popped up and got him out, and I said, Ned, what did you think when you were on the point of drowning? He said, I thought, how is John going to finish the film without me? And then the second thought was, he'll find some way to finish it without me. I know he will. And that was when he was determined to live, and he got to the surface. This was a lovely stretch of rapids, in between narrow rocks, and it was tough. And particularly when when the river narrows, of course, it speeds up tremendously, and it's extremely hard to keep on a course. Vilmos Sigmund, the cameraman, and myself, we had several falls into the river, and Vilmos was always desperately trying to keep the camera from submerging in the water, but we often failed. And we had with us a camera technician who worked at nights, trying to repair the cameras and drying them out. I had no doubles, no stuntmen. I don't like the idea of stuntmen, because I think that if a shot is dangerous enough that you need a stuntman, then you shouldn't be doing it. And that has to be a way of doing it with the actor. And of course there are exceptions to that, but we only had one shot in the picture that involved a stuntman, and that was doubling for John Voight in the Great Cataract when they get injured and the canoes collapse. Burt, on the other hand, was determined to do it himself. Now, I'll tell you about that when we get to that scene. I'll show you how it was done. We more or less shot the scene in sequence, which is something very rare in films. We're looking at a place called Woodall Shoals here. And you'll notice in the costumes that everything is kind of monochromatic. You see, this is another scene that's been desaturated. And it's I wanted to get a sense of it being all harmonious, but at the same time threatening. Again, you can look at this. You see the muted colours of the greens, and Burt and Burt's character had this in the book. The first third of the book was all about these men and their lives in Atlanta, safe, comfortable lives, and the need they all felt somehow to test themselves, or at least the Burt Reynolds character did. John Voight character, Ed, wasn't at all sure that was necessary. And in the course of the film, really, that when Burt gets injured, Voight takes over the Burt characteristics. He becomes that primal man, that primal hunter. Burt Reynolds' character wanted the experience of killing someone. And it's about the basic masculine urges, this film, and how they are suppressed by and civilized by modern life, and that men have an underlying need to express these deeper urges, which is why there is the madness of war, why war is so exciting to men, or many men. Now, Ronnie got the job because he can play the guitar. That was one of the reasons, and it was very important to the story. And in this scene, they're spending the night out there on the river, and Voight has a line there where he says, "Doesn't matter what's happening in the world, no one can find us up here." And he expresses it as an idea that, you know, all the concerns and of the world at large and domestic issues and so forth, that that they're divorced from it all, they're freed from it all. In other words, they're delivered from it, and which is where the title comes from, of Deliverance. And yet we, as an audience, know that something really nasty is going to happen. So the idea that nobody knows where they are is also menacing. And that, I think, is what works well on a film, is when you know, there are double meanings in the dialogue in the scene. And archery, of course, was an important element in this thing, and they had their bows. And in the scene which follows this in the morning, John Voight gets up and goes out and has the opportunity of shooting a deer. This scene is something, they hear something. There's a sense that they're being observed. And again, this ratchets up this tension. These actors reacted so brilliantly together. All of them extremely unselfish actors. And it was really a sense of community between them. And you see, Dickie and I had a big argument. He said, no, you've got to set up these characters like in the book, and you've got to see their lives in Atlanta and all that. And I said, no, it has to have film has to have a unity of geography, a film like this, to increase the intensity. And I said, film is different from a novel. Just by the casting of these men and how they behave and how they react, how they speak, their gestures, you know as much about them as you need to understand the film and where they come from. And the Burt Reynolds character is he's dominant. He's controlling the other three. He's pushing and testing them much further than they would wish to go. I had as part of the cost cutting involved in getting this film made, we had, for instance, that bridge you saw earlier was built by a local fellow. And I had an assistant who ran around finding extras and fixing things up, and so the whole film was made in a incredibly economic manner. Vilmos Sigmund was the cameraman. He's Hungarian. He got out of Hungary when in 1956 when the Russians moved into Budapest, and he shot the footage there that we saw of the Russians tanks moving in and the students throwing Molotov cocktails at them. And I thought, a man who's done that and been fired on by Russians is the kind of man I need for a film like this. So this is the beginning of this sort of transformation of Ed Lewis, the John Voight character. He gets up in the morning and in the early sun, and he sees a deer, and he has his bow. And this is, of course, one of the things that that Lewis has told him. You get the opportunity of shooting an animal up here with your bow, and this is something very important to him. And as he works his way through the forest, searching, and he's alone now. He's moved away from the others, and the sense of this four people together, giving them their strength. Now he's testing himself by going out alone, and he sees a deer, and he carefully gets out his arrow, and this is steel-tipped arrows, and this is a bow with 60 or 80 pound strain on it. And when he looks at it, he now has the possibility of killing. And he sees this beautiful animal, and his hand starts to shake, and he can't do it. Now, this is very important because later on, when he has to shoot a man, we've already seen how he gets the shakes and can't handle it. And so we fear that he's not going to be able to kill the man who is trying to kill them. In a film, the casting and the behavior of the characters tells you about them. You don't need to have tedious scenes showing them with their wives and families, so the costume becomes very important. You see Burt there with his sawn-off rubber jacket exposing his biceps, and you see the blandness of Ed with his grey sweater there, and Ned with his pork pie hat and his football jersey, and selecting their clothes is a way of building the characters. And the costume sessions with actors are always very, very interesting. I made a couple of films with Lee Marvin, and he was meticulous about his costume and his props. And good actors, good film actors they recognize that they can say a lot with what they wear. Now you see this now, how monochromatic the film is at this point, and indeed throughout. We had, the interesting thing is, I had no intention of having a second unit, but the river proved to be the dividing line between the New York Union and the Chicago Union. So there was a big argument. They had to say you had to use a New York unit, and the other side telling me they had to use a Chicago unit. And this argument raged, and they said if you're on one side of the river, you have to use a Chicago unit, and if you go on the other side of the river, you have to use a New York unit. And so it was obviously ridiculous and impossible. So we made a compromise, and Bill Butler, who was a documentary cameraman, came down from Chicago and he's a fine fellow. And he shot that. You remember a little earlier, there's a shot of the Burt Reynolds shooting a fish. Well, he shot the fish. I seldom ever, never really use a second unit because I just feel that every image should have the same kind of integrity, the same style as everything else. Well, I've spoken about how these four characters were aspects of Dickie's own personality, and I suppose that the one that was closest to myself is probably the character of Ed, because I've always been a man of nature. I've always explored mountains and rivers and forests, and I feel at home. And I feel that when we lose our connection to nature is when breeds neurosis, and because we're part of nature as human beings, we're nothing separate. And by separating ourselves through the comforts of city life, we lose that connection. And of course, I live in cities and I have the same problems as everybody else. And I think that was what I felt about that connected me to Ed. Ed was a man of the city who had this yearning to connect with nature, yet ambivalent about it. Did he have the energy, the determination to do that, which is a process that I've been through myself. We're coming up to this famous scene of the mountain men who come and attack our fellows. Now, Bill McKinney, who plays the part of the rapist, is a marvelous actor. And look at this shot now. You'll see this shot. This scene is done in one shot. It goes on for about 4 minutes, and the actors are moving. We rehearsed for this shot for most of a day. It took a day to shoot that one scene. We rehearsed it all morning and shot it in the afternoon because there are many moves here, and the actors all stay in the frame, or they move out and come back in. And what I wanted to do was to increase the tension. Unconsciously, the audience is feeling the tension because this up until this point, the cutting has been very rhythmic, and here the camera just sits there, doesn't move, and the actors constantly changing their positions. And this scene has required enormous amount of rehearsal because each actor had probably 10 or 12 moves in relation to the other actors. Now it's still there. We're still on the same shot, which has been going on now for about 3 minutes. My intention really about these mountain men is that the underlayer psychologically was that they were the sort of malevolent spirits of the forest, of nature, and that this was a kind of nature's revenge on these men who represented the people of Atlanta who were killing the river. And one of the things that the famous expression "squeal like a pig" came about in a very interesting way because when I was shooting the picture, the studio demanded that I shot alternative scenes for television, and including language. So, language, bad language, fucks and blinds, it couldn't be shown on television. So we had to find alternatives. And so we all tried to think of on the spot, and nobody liked doing these alternatives, TV alternatives. It's just a drag. But I think it was Roscoe Pellenberg who came up with "Squeal Like a Pig," which was to take the place of a more powerful kind of language. And but it was so good that I decided to keep it in the main version. Ned was marvelous the way he acted this scene out. And he and Bill McKinney spent a lot of time together before we shot it, because it was a kind of everyone was nervous of it. I didn't know how to shoot it until, often the way with me, until I found a setting that was, and this setting, you see, with the brown leaves and these laurels with these acid green leaves that gave this kind of nasty light, and the tangled wood. It all felt. As soon as I found this setting, I knew how to shoot it. And you'll notice that the relationship between the distance, it's all really done from the point of view of Voight. We're seeing what he saw, and that kind of distance. Ned, felt all his life he's had to endure this. Every time someone sees him on the street, they say "squeal like a pig," and he wrote a very interesting piece in the New York Times many years ago when they were doing a whole feature about rape. And he felt like a rape victim. The censor wanted to cut some of this, and as you might expect, and I resisted it. This, and also the subsequent killing of Bill McKinney, the Mountain Man here. And I suppose this hadn't been seen in the cinema before. I met someone just the other day, and he said to me, I saw that film of yours, Deliverance. He said, I walked out halfway through, and I've never been to the cinema since. Now, when the Lewis character arrives and sees his opportunity of killing a man, he takes it with great enthusiasm and intention. This cowboy coward, who's on the left-hand side there, the man with the missing teeth, Burt Reynolds found him. Burt used to work in a dude ranch, with cowboy coward, and he said he suggested him for the part. And cowboy, we'd staying at this motel. Cowboy would spend his evening. His idea of a nice evening would to get 24 bottles of beer and into the bathtub with a lot of ice, and he'd sit on the toilet seat and work his way through them. He was the delightful man. The killing of Bill McKinney with the arrow was something that brought about this moral discussion. And the censor wanted to cut the scene of Bill McKinney dying. They said it just went on too long, and that they would, they didn't mind scenes where a man was shot and just dropped out of frame, and that was it, which I thought was completely dishonest. I wanted the Burt Reynolds character to have to confront the reality of killing someone, that that it wasn't something that just it wasn't entertainment. It had to be faced, and these men have to face the reality of this man. And then Bill McKinney had tremendous discipline and control over his body, and he held his breath completely and his eyes from blinking for 2 minutes. He was able to do that and he trained himself to do that, especially for the shot. And you come round onto him, and you see his face, and he's completely convincing as a dying man. And it was a brilliant piece of acting. I mean, these are the qualities that you look for in a film actor. It's not just how you say the lines, but it's all about gesture, movement, and discipline, and searching for real conviction. What we followed this with, you see the acid green leaves I'm talking about, that look, you see the feeling of this place is perfectly appropriate to the scene that we're shooting. That's what makes, I think, it so convincing in some ways. And now they start this debate about what they should do with his body. Should they go to the police? Where are the police? Burt, of course, Burt's attitude is that he, there's no law. Just bury it and go. Drew is the moral conscience. He's completely against it. Ned, of course, is just so traumatized by being raped that he just wants to bury this thing and bury this whole story and John Voight is can't make up his mind. He can see both points of view, and and this, oddly enough, reflected their views when the notion of sending Jim Dickey away. They all, Burt said desperate to get rid of him. Drew said, no, I think he should stay. I think he's a good influence, and John couldn't make up his mind, and Ned wanted him to go, couldn't stand him. Now you look at Bill Kinney there. Look at that. He held that pose for 2 minutes, holding his breath and unmoving, while this whole dialogue, this whole dialectic was going on around him. Interestingly enough, this is before CGI. Now, if people are so cynical today that when they see something astonishing on film, they assume it's been done in the computer. Like the arrow when he was shot with the arrow, I just simply made it on a cut. I had already planted the arrow in his chest. He turns and it's there, and you get a completely convincing idea that he's been. The arrow has been shot through him, and I think the computer has brought this cynicism about, and my next film, I'm thinking of putting a note on the credits like they have that no animals were harmed in the making of this film, and no computer was used in the making of this film, because it has, David Hockney, the artist, said to me, now, he said, when you watched a film in the past, you knew you were watching something that had occurred at some point in time and place. And today, you can't be sure. So he said it's going to kill film. And it certainly makes people cynical. This was Burt's great scene. This madness, the insanity comes out. And yet, at the same time, he is exhilarated by having killed this man. And he wants to bury him and get away with it. We were up there in the mountains, and so there was a lot of cloud. And I tried to shoot the film very largely with grey skies, so that except for the beginning when I was looking for a little sunlight to make the water glitter and to reflect their delight in the beginning of this journey. But thereafter, I wanted these grey skies to mute off in themselves, muting the colours, and giving a sense of twilight, of menace, and again this the acid colour of those leaves. This moral debate, of course, undermined them completely. It led to they had to invent stories. You can see what happens when the moral issues are blunted, when it becomes possible, when it seems allowable that you break the law. It has a corrupting effect. Drew, of course, as I've said, was the moral conscience of the group, and he argues it out with Lewis, and eventually Lewis prevails, and they go off to bury the body. Again, when in the next sequence, and they bury the body, you'll see how, again, as a tribute to Bill McKinney, that he has to endure actually being buried, and again he holds his breath for a long period of time while we put the earth over him. I shot this in anamorphic, which is a ratio of 1 to 2.35, and I love this because it gives you a distance between the characters. You can open up the frame, and so that the landscape in this picture, the river, is one of the characters, and it's always present because there's always space for it. This, we had a lens on this picture which was specially developed for us, which was a gyroscopic lens, which was sort of floating. And this was so that we could try and help us to shoot on the river, where there was a lot of agitation and movement. But it smoothed things out too much and made them look too pleasant and easy. This was before the Steadicam, incidentally. Observe Bill Kinney, how he's able to play dead in this way. Look. And he never, ever gives the impression of actually any life at all. His body flops around. It's extraordinary. And as you see this almost kind of religious burial, look at his eyes. Isn't that extraordinary? And they scrabble away here. And when you see Drew, again, look, they're digging a hole for him. And Drew holds off because he doesn't want to. He thinks it's wrong, and then he starts to dig, and it becomes almost neurotic. The digging, it's almost like he's digging his own grave. And one of the interesting things about this film is that because it takes place wholly on this river, really, or nearby, and the clothes they wear are clothes that could be worn today, or there's no, and that it doesn't seem to be aged. When you think the film is 30 years old, it looks to me as though it could have been made last year. And there's something very, they're descending into a kind of primitive world here, death and burial, and the absence of society, and the absence of a priest to say a prayer, the absence of a tomb. They're back into a primal world, these men. And now the desperate need to cover it, and the hand that's extruding itself from and refuses to be covered, it's a nightmare. And that hand, is going to haunt them because it returns later in the film. It comes up from the river. Now look at Bill. Now he's under there as they cover him up. I mean, extraordinary. That's real acting, and great tribute to him. And look how, look how untouched that is. One of the things I found when I was looking for this river and this landscape is that, rivers attract people. They attract people, and the banks get trodden down, and it shows on film. And this was primal. It was untouched. You couldn't get into that river except in a four-wheel drive vehicle, and then by canoe. So it was untouched. Very few people were able to get into it. And now they set off after having buried the man, Bill Kinney, in those canoes. And Drew, in a sense, you feel that he's himself a dead man. He's betrayed himself in some way. And I wanted this to be ambiguous here when Drew gets shot or falls into the water or whatever, that you don't quite know if he's been shot or if he just falls in the water, gives up his life in a certain way out of a kind of despair. This is one of the most beautiful parts of the river, with those rocks narrowing it like that. And you see him now, you see this kind of despair, doesn't know, has no heart to go on. He's complicit in a murder. And they believe that this, he looks up, is this man, his companion, the companion of the dead man, is he following them, is he watching them? And then you see this look of Drew, and suddenly he shakes his head and he just falls in. This we shot on another piece of river, which is another where there's a dam, and we were able to stop the dam, stop the water higher up, and then release it. And we were able to build underwater rails for the canoe to go on when it collapses, and it was all triggered. And then I released the water, we rehearsed it, and the water it came down in a kind of dribble. So I said, okay, open another sluice gate. And they did, and it came rather more river than we really intended. This is the one shot which has the double doing for Jon Voight, but Burt comes down this himself. See, that's the double shot there. The canoe comes clattering down. The wooden one is completely lost at this point, broken up, and they're looking for Drew. And here we've got the camera half under the water and half above it, and it was, you know, I had a lot of angry actors here because, you know, I really let too much water come down, and it was a raging torrent. So this is Burt doing that shot himself and injured his back. We had a net just below that was another vast, deep fall, and I'm screaming here on the intercom on the radio mic, saying, you know, stop the water. And this little pool here is magnificent, with these great rocks climbing out of the river, and they have to cling to this little fold in the rocks. Lewis' character's broken his leg, and this is a point at which in the story where Jon Voight has to take over, and he has to find in himself these kind of primal survivor and killer that Burt was. Burt is a broken man. We did everything simply in this film. You see, that was just a lamb bone I stuck into his thigh. They're searching, of course, for Drew's body, which they can't discover. And there again, every time I look at those shots of that water coming down there, I feel terrible guilt that I put these men into more danger than they should have done. This is, again, Jon Voight's claim that I'd saved his life by getting him to do the picture because he was in such despair, and then I spent the rest of the time trying to kill him. And there's something very moving out of broken guitar. All these images of iconic images, the images that connect you to that particular person in the film, and you see how tested they are, how they have to respond to this situation. It's now about survival. It's about survival against the elements and survival from their having buried this man and killed him. The cast and crew, we forged very, very close relationships because we were out in the wilds there. There was no cinemas, no entertainment. And at night we'd just deal with our bruises and cuts and have a couple of drinks and talk about it and then go to bed. We were it was like a military operation. We were like a platoon, and there was great love between us and great affection and great support for each other. And when you think of Ned here, the first time he'd ever been in a film, and he was plunged into this, and he had a reckless air to him. At one point he was in the canoe with Drew, and they were coming down, and Drew got it all wrong. He was at the back and he was steering, and he got it all wrong. And Ned so angry, he just threw his paddle away. I mean, in a completely self-destructive way, just threw the paddle away. He had a tremendous anger to him. And I suppose it was partly to do with the fact that he had nothing to measure this experience against. He told me afterwards that that it was so cathartic, this film, and that every film he did subsequently was somehow a tepid version of Deliverance. And he's enormous power as an actor. You know, I just saw him recently in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof playing Big Daddy. Extraordinary performance. That's his background as a stage actor. I also saw John Voight playing Hamlet many years ago, and it was a brilliant performance. Now this was interesting here. Now I had to find a night shoot. Now if you can do night, obviously you can't light this. It's impossible. So okay, we do night. We shoot at night. We shoot day, and then we darken it down and all that. Now he has to climb up this cliff, and in order to, you see this sky here. You see the sky of course was white because it was day when we were shooting it, day for night. But I put the sky in by printing a negative into the positive, so that the white became black, and that's how I got the impression. Right, I mean, it was imperfect. It was not. You could do it much better today with CGI, of course, but you see how hazardous this was for John to climb this mountain. Look, we had a harness on him that you can't see in case he was to fall, but it was a tough assignment, and he almost loses his bow. He's gone up there, of course, to find the man who seems to be waiting for them up there in order to shoot them. Having already shot Drew, perhaps, he goes up and with the determination that he has to kill this man if they are to survive. The man, of course, was also the witness to the killing of his friend. Now he tries to find some comfort. You see the little boy there, my son, Charlie. That was Charlie's first film. He subsequently made many more, but so his first film was the age of 3, and he drops it. This is a picture of his wife and son, and that's a kind of metaphor for losing, the prospect of losing his family, losing his life, and losing them. And he gets up. There's the sky again that we put in. Actually, it's not so bad as I remember it. Enormously difficult to shoot this sequence, and I owe a lot to Vilmos Sigmund, the cameraman, because no shot was impossible for him. Everything, the bigger the challenge, the better he liked it. And nothing could faze him, a man who'd been shot at by the Russian tanks. This is the shot. You see, we're coming up into this sky, and it should have been a bit darker, but we had to live with that problem. But it's in a sense, the night is convincing, and what he has to do now, of course, is to find this man, and he waits for him. And tension in movies is a very interesting, the way it functions, the way it operates on an audience. Now, so he's come up here. We know the man is around somewhere, and he's got to wait for him. He's exhausted from the whole hazardous journey and the climb up the mountain, and he starts nodding off to sleep. And we're terrified that he's going to fall asleep and the man is going to find him there. And he just can't keep awake, much as he tries. And Voight is such a tremendous actor, and he was very much an actor who, in the tradition, in the sort of Brando tradition of reality, and everything was a struggle for John at that time in his life. Everything was a struggle. He questioned everything, and Burt, it was completely different. Burt wanted just to get it done, and he could always find a way of getting through a scene. John would challenge it all the time, challenge everything. Why are we doing it this way? What have I heard? What am I doing? And so he had a good influence on Burt because he pushed Burt to be more thoughtful, and Burt pushed him to be more spontaneous. And so here he is now. This is the way tension works. This man he's fallen asleep, and this character appears. And all he has is his bow and arrow, and there's a man with a gun. And he doesn't even know if this is the other man. And we've also seen him unable to shoot the deer. And if he couldn't shoot a deer, how is he going to find the courage to shoot a man? And people are often a little confused here because as he's trying, now he gets this, what they call deer fever, where your hand starts to shake, and and we're terrified that he's not going to be able to do it. And the arrow is moving around, and the man sees him, turns, brings his gun up, and Voight, it seems impossible that he's going to do it. And then he steadies and he fires, and as he falls, another one of his arrows goes into his side. Now, some people found this confusing. They think that's the same arrow that he fired that didn't he didn't fire it properly when it went into his side. But of course, it was a different arrow. It was one of those in his sheath as he pulls back. He has to remove the arrow, and then the man appears. It appears that the man hasn't been shot. We don't see the arrow in him until he's defenseless now, and he can't do anything about it. But the man can't hold the gun and fire. And now we see the arrow. So that was the way I staged it, and there was a little bit of confusion in people's minds there, but it was the best I could do. And now he goes up and to examine this man. Was this the man? Was this the second man? The man who had no front teeth? And he looks into the mouth, and he sees that the man he's horrified because he sees that the man has teeth. And he looks into his mouth, opens his mouth, and he's got teeth. It can't be the same man. And then he pulls down and he sees that it's a denture. Still not sure whether it can be him or not. Now, this sequence was coward there, arrived in the morning for the scene where he's going to, he's lowered down. Voight now is ties him in the rope and he lowers the body down. So we were rehearsing it, and I had a dummy which I lowered down so that we could find a path that the body could be lowered down into the water from the cliff top. And this shot, and Cowboys, I had the dummy going down, and I said, "Okay, Cowboy, look, I'm just rehearsing here now. You see what you have to do. You lower it down, and just as long as you mustn't move, you've got to be dead." And Cowboy, still a bit woozy from his 24 bottles of beer of the previous night, looked down and said, "Well, I guess if he can do it, I can." And he did it. Like everybody else in this movie, he went the whole way. I mean, you saw the height of this chasm, and you can imagine trying to do this shot without having drunk 24 bottles of beer. I think they were a great help to him on this occasion. Voight's he's a method actor, really, I suppose you'd have to say, in that. So if he's, we're doing a scene where he's out of breath, John would say to me, "Okay, I need 3 minutes warning before the shot so that I can get out of breath," and he would then sprint for 3 minutes to get himself in sweating and out of breath. And Burt would say to me, I need 20 seconds warning before the shot. And so John come running back, puffing, blowing, and Burt would then squirt some spritzer onto his face for sweat, and then and breathe. And that was indicative of the two methods of acting. More tension here. This is, of course, the classic tension, isn't it, of the rope that's going to break. And that's John did that shot himself. As I say, there was only that one shot. And under the water here, which we did in a swimming pool, he gets entangled with the man that he's killed. And there's a kind of horror in that. He gets up. Now we find a new Ed Lewis. He's becoming Lewis, and he has that intensity and violence that Lewis had. And he gets up, and this shot is very interesting. When we're doing this shot, there's a composition here which I particularly like. He coming up in a moment or two, I'll show you what it's about, and it's how the water and the colours are blending these men into each other. And there's Cowboy, determined to be as dead as his friend Bill McKinney. See when he looks back there? And I said to Voight, just look back at that point. And he said, well, why would I look back like that? And I said, well, because it improves the composition. And he said, well, I can't do that because there's no reason. I said, well, okay, well, you hear a noise. Ah, fine, okay. And I got him to look back and to get this marvelous composition. And again, so this is, you're cutting forward in time. Here's a shot which tells you exactly what's happened. Here's Burt injured in the canoe. The body of the mountain man is tossed into the water, and they're leaving. So, it's storytelling on film is all about finding movements of time and place that progress the story. Now, we know exactly what's happening now and what they have to do. They have to get off this river and get Burt to a hospital. And the river's widening now as they come down. But they have one more great set of rapids to negotiate. And, of course, Burt is in terrible pain. But as they come through, they come upon Drew. And here he is with his arm twisted behind his back, which, again, that tells you that he's been taken down and then crashed against rocks. And it came about when we were fooling around. Ronnie had this party trick. He had it sort of double jointed. He could bring his arm around his head. I said, great, perfect. You just do that. And we then put a kind of bruise mark on his shoulder there. And it's so awful, that that shot. And again, but it's very, very simple. We made the film with very small resources. Now, again, CGI today, anyone watching this film, if it was today, if it had been made today, they say, oh, well, they did that with CGI. They just moved his arm with a computer, that wretched computer, which is ruining everything. Now, it was Ronnie's turn now to play dead. And when I look at this film again now, the commitment and the acting and the picture are so extraordinary. I mean, I was so lucky to have these actors who could and were prepared to do scenes like this. Now they attach rocks to him, to his body, and they sink him into the river. And because we knew we were going to do these scenes, we rehearsed them. We rehearsed, practiced the actors in holding their breath for long periods of time. It was all very, very carefully prepared, this film. And in all these scenes that had to be done, we worked them out, how to do it and how the actors should perform them. Very touching scene, this. It's a kind of improvised funeral service where Ed promises to look after his kids and wife, and this is the first time you realize that he's married, let alone having children. But it comes at a point where it needs to be said. See these rocks. That's one of the reasons I chose this river. It had this extraordinary formations of these rocks that jut out of the river like angry swords or weapons. The whole river has spiky, nasty, hostile, threatening air to it. The film editor is called Tom Priestley, the son of J.B. Priestley. And Tom, I'd done a film with him before. He had great concentration, and I shoot very little film and very few takes, which of course helped us a lot in this. I couldn't shoot many takes, but I think there are some passages, well, particularly the discussion after the death of the mountain man, where Tom, I shot it all in one shot at one point. That was the tracking shot you saw, but I then got nervous and I decided to cover it from other angles, and that was tremendously well cut by Tom Priestley. But for the most part, my method of shooting is to shoot very little. I mean, when I made Point Blank at MGM, I had the lowest ratio of film of any director for the last 20 years. I'd spend a lot of time rehearsing and getting things right. And I try to get everybody realizing on the film that every time the camera's rolling, that it's going to be in the movie. If you shoot from loads of different angles and lenses, the feeling gets to the actors that, well, probably this shot is not going to be in the film. And I try to raise the tension by making them concentrate to a point where they know when my camera's running that it's going to be in the movie. But this is this kind of sequence, is very hard to do, to make these shots match. And of course, we couldn't shoot any sound on this film because the sound of the river just swallowed everything up. This scene is very interesting. I put these cars there, dumped them there, with the idea that it represented civilization in a very ironic way, that they're so thrilled to see these wrecks because it indicates that they've come to somewhere where that's accessible. And so this joy they feel in looking at these wrecks, and also, they've been free of the detritus of society. They've been in raw nature, and now they're delighted with these horrid junk that they find by the side of the river. Some of the people at Warner's felt that this was the end of the film. They come out of it. For me, the scenes that follow this, where they narrowly avoid being arrested, and we see the effect that this experience has had on their personalities, are the best scenes for me in the picture. And so I was very insistent that we should include them subsequently. But there was a feeling that this was a bit of anticlimactic. But for me, these scenes here where you see the river beginning to be flooded, and that communities are sinking under this water, and the water is placid, it's dead, it's tamed. There you see they pass the dam, which is still in construction, but the water is rising. There's something sacrilegious about killing a river, and there's something crude, isn't there, about that, raw and crude about the dam making a huge barrage. Here's a change of style in the editing, that now we're in this softer world. I was using dissolves so that it becomes a kind of dreamlike, as opposed to the harsh cutting and harsh reality of the earlier scenes. And now this is a road, you see, which has been frozen. And this church has been rescued from drowning, and it's going to be, later on you're going to see it towed away, and there's a sense here of having come back, and that this church is hanging over them. Again, it's another, in a way, accusing them of this crime that they've committed. And he eventually gets up. See how the land is being scoured away, because that's where the water will rise to. And he comes up, and there are the two cars. They never expected that they would be brought down here by the two brothers, just touching a car, experiencing civilization such as it is. And he comes across this family who are on the move, who are a very poor family who are shipping out in some way. And this man on the right there was the man who built the bridge and did all the construction of what little bit we had. And he's having to be the questioning the police. And that poor man there, who was an ambulance driver, was shot and killed just shortly after we made the film. And I always see that, just fleetingly, that face, and I think of him. This is the local doctor, and this girl on the left was actually the daughter of the man who built the bridge for us. And this little scene where he is so delighted to have those hot water, paper tissues, all the things we take for granted and now become sort of great iconic luxuries. And this is one of my favourite scenes, probably the favourite scenes in the film. You encounter the compassion of these simple people. He comes in, he's a haunted man. Ned stands up. They all look at him and sit down, and the woman is telling a story about a pumpkin, and to kind of deflect from his pain. And it is the kindness of these people that finally makes him break down. And the simple gestures of offering food, and Ned is staring at him, wondering how broken he is. And eventually, these little things are past. And so these simple gestures, these simple things take on a significance there. And he breaks down. Of course, there's a kind of embarrassment and a sympathy. And then Ned makes this wonderful line, which is his own line. I had to find a way of ending it in some way. And Ned says, this corn is good. And it's a wonderful delivery that just ends the scene. Well, not quite, because we have the story of the pumpkin. So the next phase of the film now is going to be how they're going to get away with it, and the kind of neurosis that grows up, the tension, the anger, the bitterness, and the closeness of these men is now being sundered. and he's suspicious. He's on his guard, and they've gone after they go after get clothes because everything is lost, and they have these. I had them have the same shirts and the same pants. They just gone to a store and bought the first thing they got their hands on, but what it does is to show you that they have there's a connection between them, that they are one and the same. They're bound together. And again, it's a way of using. Now he discovers, of course, that they've found this canoe, and they've got to find a way of dealing with this issue. And he thinks that Ned has spoken. He's seen him speaking to the police. He thinks that Ned is going to betray him. Here they are both wearing the same shirts, and they're the same dark green colours that I've kept to throughout the film, the greens and the browns, binding the picture together. Ned is an instinctive actor. There's always a feeling of violence there, but it's his responses are always true. His emotions are very difficult for him to deal with, to control, but his responses are always about truth. Now, Jim Dickey, who I sent away, is now back, and this wonderful presence, and the accent, and he always wore this. He always wore a Stetson himself. When I was at Atlanta Airport with him, and this 7-foot basketball player he spotted, and he went over to him and he said, "I'm a huge fan of yours. I want you to know you've got a lot of fans down in Columbus, Georgia." And he's a tall man himself, he's 6'2", and there was this 7-foot basketball player looking down at him, chewing gum and staring at him. And when Jim had finished his praise, the basketball player said, "On your way, cowboy." And Jim, of course, is not an actor. Non-actors, you have to cast them so that they play themselves. So Jim, this was just a version of Jim Dickey. This is a scene I love too, because he says they're going along, and we've already seen that little church when he came out of the water, and now he says, the taxi driver, also playing himself, a taxi driver, and he says, "Hold on a minute while I pass this church here," and you see the church being towed along, and there's something curiously menacing about it, but also it tells you about. It's an image which tells you about the flooding and the effect of it. Here's a church being towed away. This is a scene where there's the local doctor again, we saw earlier, who also turned out to be not a bad actor. But I particularly like the taxi driver. Here is a scene where they've got to warn Burt that they've had to change their story. And there's a guard there. This guard was my driver, actually. He was also a non-actor. But the Georgia accent was so extreme that anyone who speaks with it is halfway there because it's so convincing. In fact, I was having breakfast in a cafe diner there one morning when I first went up there to Georgia, and the waitress said to me, "You want any eels?" And I thought, eels for breakfast, And I said, "What do you say?" She said, "You want any eels?" What she was saying was, "Do you want anything else?" Now, this scene I would like to shoot again because Burt is a little bit over the top here. The pain and the suffering and all that. But in a way, it is part of his character, so I kind of convinced myself that it was okay. Voight's performance here is extraordinary. There's very little in this scene. Just a simple how Ned says, "Well, I don't want to see you for a while." Deeply, deeply humiliated and shamed by what occurred. Again, the background is of the shaven landscape that's been cleared away for the dam, and this sense of the water rising, covering their crime. You know, his Jim Dickey's son is a journalist and wrote a piece, I think, in the New Yorker about his experiences as a 12-year-old boy with his father following the film along. There was one moment I remember. I described this first occasion when we went on the river together, and Jim Dickey was the canoe capsized, and then we started back across very difficult terrain, and Jim started to get ill. I thought he was having a heart attack, and he's diabetic, and he was going to foam at the mouth, and his son was with us, this boy. He was very, very upset by the experience. We got him some apple juice, and so it was, Jim saw himself as a completely different person from the one he really was. He had an extraordinary approach with women. He'd say, meet a woman, he'd look into her eyes and he'd say, "Do you have a man?" First time I've seen this film for, well, it must be 10 years at least. And when I watch one of my films, I think most directors would agree with this, shortly after having made it, all you could see and remember is the pain that you suffered in doing it, and of all the things that you could have done better. And after a period of time, in this case, maybe, 20 years since I made it, 10 years ago, looked at it, and again, looking at it today, the pain, all the wounds have healed, and the pain has diminished, and I can see its quality, and it has a great power to it. And what I do remember with pleasure is the comradeship of making the film, with the actors and the crew, with filmmaker Sigmund and Rosper Pallenberg and others that helped me to do it, and that's memorable. This film was an adventure. The people who shared it have a bond which has lasted ever since. Those actors are all my friends, and we see each other, and it's like, meeting someone you've fought in a war with, and you look into each other's eyes and you say, well, we did it. Here is another incident of the effect of the dam, that he discovers these graves, these bodies being dug up because the graveyard is going to be flooded. And it makes him think about Drew and the mountain man who are lying at the bottom of the river, and whether their bodies will be recovered. The one woman in the film, really, well, not quite, or the nurse and those things, but the only character, really, and his wife, when he comes back. And we shot this in a house up there in Clayton, Georgia, belonging to the doctor, and took out all his furniture and borrowed stuff that was more suitable to Boyd. So the final shot is of this hand rising from the river, and this is a very important image for me because of my allegiance to the Grail legend. And in the Grail legend, in my film Excalibur, you see Excalibur held by a hand which comes out of the river, of the lake. And I've used this image in several films. The lake represents, or the river, the unconscious, and this thing rising out of it is of the force of the unconscious rising into the conscious world. So this wasn't in the book or anything. I put this in this hand rising, and of course we knew that the body was under there somewhere, and was it coming to the surface? So we did it, and like everything else in this film, we did everything in a very simple way. I thought the body would be bloated by this point, so we just I put on the hand a rubber glove and filled it with water so that the hand looked as though it was bloated from being submerged in the water. And Brian De Palma, my friend, who is a great admirer of Deliverance, used this image as an homage, he said, in Carrie. Well, we got to the end of it, didn't we?
I hope you enjoyed that classic film commentary. Sometimes you can see a film from a whole new perspective and appreciate the work that goes into the making of some of our favorite films. Now, do me a huge favor. Help support the channel by subscribing, clicking on that like button. It goes a long way in keeping the channel active. Thanks for making it to the end of this video, and I hope to bring you back for another video soon. For now, Gator out. Watch for new movie reviews and documentary series. Don't forget to subscribe and click on that bell so you know when new reviews arrive.